The back table cover and the Mayo stand cover, they're clear. So you can actually see, like, is it set up or is it just opened? You can see, do I have that retractor that the doctor likes? Do I have sutures already opened? It can really, really help with just the visualization and the flow of the OR.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this Vendor Spotlight, we speak with Laurel Stebbins, clinical specialist at TIDI Products, and we're going to be talking about the Sterile-Z back table cover, which will cover a sterile field, Melanie.
I think this is a great conversation to have because so many of us have questions about how to properly cover a sterile field, if we should even cover our sterile field, and then if we're going to, how do we not contaminate our back table when we're trying to take those drapes off. And so I'm really looking forward to breaking that down, talking about this solution and discussing how we can make this an easier process for everybody in the operating room.
All right, we're going to be right back after a short break with Laurel Stebbins, clinical specialist at TIDI Products.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Laurel Stebbins, clinical specialist at TIDI Products. And Laurel, we're really excited to have you on the show today. We're going to be talking about a number of things, but really standardization around covering a sterile field. And I think this is so huge for our audience. But first, I want to welcome you to the show and have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. Like you said, I'm a clinical specialist with TIDI Products. I've been with the company not quite 5 years, but I actually started out as a scrub tech. So that's how I kind of got into the medical field in the first place.
Well, we've had a number of surgical technologists and scrub techs on the show to date, and I don't think we've ever covered this topic, though, have we, Melanie?
No, this is a first.
So, Laurel, before we dive into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about TIDI Products? Where are you located? What kinds of things do you do to help the perioperative world do a better job?
Yeah, so we are located in Neenah, Wisconsin. So nice little town in Wisconsin. The majority of our solutions are actually domestically manufactured here in the U.S. Most of our eye protection and PPE is manufactured here. And we're a medical device company that provides a variety of solutions from specialty OR drapes to facial protection, falls protection, and patient safety. Our main focus is to support caregivers and protect patients. That is what we are about. We really are committed to that.
Yeah, I've worked in a number of different settings, and falls prevention is super huge. You know, you hear a lot about that. And I think also with everything that's been going on during the pandemic in terms of supply chain, when you say domestically manufactured, I think that's music to a lot of supply chain folks' ears anyway, because I think a resilient supply chain is going to be looking for nearshoring opportunities or working with companies that do manufacture products locally here in the States. And so that's great to hear. Why don't we talk about, as you've gotten involved as a clinical specialist, I'm sure you, having worked on the front lines, you saw a number of things that maybe needed improvement or there were struggles that would happen in your day to day. What were the things as you joined TIDI Products that you felt like, hey, these are areas that we really help with that, you know, are sometimes a common pain point for scrub techs and nurses alike?
I think one of the things that got me super excited about TIDI Products and like our product portfolio was the Sterile-Z back table cover, which allows you to cover the sterile field to protect it from airborne contamination. And it really added that standardized method of doing it. Because when I was a scrub tech, we always sort of had that question of, should we be covering this field that's not going to be used right away? Should we not? And the Sterile-Z was so exciting because it was like, here's that opportunity to cover your sterile field in a standardized, easy manner. And then the AORN guidelines were updated in 2019 to say that we absolutely should be covering our sterile field. They say to cover the sterile field if it will not be immediately used or during periods of increased activity. And this product fit right into it. And I was like, this is great. This answers that question and allows us a way to do it.
I think there's a lot of confusion, though, too, about covering back tables and what we got taught in the OR when we were first learning. Do we cover? Do we not? Are we supposed to? Should we not? And then, I mean, how long can a back table stay open anyway if it's not going to be used? Can you maybe discuss what's true in all of that versus what isn't, and then how the Sterile-Z back table drape really makes it possible to do what's right?
Yeah. So initially AORN did say, don't cover your sterile field. And that was mostly not because we always learned and knew that airborne contamination was a thing. And we knew that airborne contamination would settle on our back table. But we were advised not to cover a sterile field, mostly because there was just no clear method for covering and removing that cover without contaminating, without exacerbating the problem, right? So then the Sterile-Z came into play, and it was like, it avoided all of those pitfalls of contamination, of applying the drape, removing the drape, and gave the clear cut, it's the sterile scrub tech that puts it on. The person who scrubbed in will put it on. It's two non-sterile people that will take it off. And it added that measure of this is a clear cut, standardized, repeatable way to cover your sterile field to protect it from that airborne contamination that we were always aware of in the first place. So that's what I think is really cool about it.
I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with scrub techs. We're in the room. We need to cover the back table. And the first question is, am I allowed to cover it? And I'm like, yes, you can cover it. Well, then it's like, how do I do it? I'm like, well, don't just put 1 3/4 sheet over it and think you're done, because how are you going to get that off? And then I've argued with them over what's best, what's not. But we were always trying to fumble with 3/4 sheets and how many do we put and how do we put it on? And it wasn't standardized. It was whatever you came up with in your brain that you could work through that would, okay, we're not going to contaminate the back table if we do it this way. And so hitting on that standardized cut and dry method is, I think, key, because we're in a hurry and we want to get it done. We want to do it right, but we don't want to screw up either. So if it's always the same and it's consistent, that is something that makes everything easier and helps us do it the right way. So I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I kind of think back to when the C-arm or drape first came out. When we were covering the foot of the C-arm, there wasn't that standardized way. We made do with what we had with 3/4 sheets or a Mayo stand cover. And then something like the C-armor came out and said, here is that repeatable, standardized way to cover the foot of the C-arm when you're rotating from AP to lateral multiple swings. And that is what the Sterile-Z is now, It's that standardized, repeatable method.
I like that. So let's talk a little bit about when you're going into facilities or when you hear people talking, how many people do you think typically are covering their back tables? Is it maybe standard practice, or is it something that people still, maybe there's too many misconceptions about that they're maybe not even doing it?
It's really hit or miss. Hospitals kind of decide on their own here or there, if they're going to cover or not in the operating room, and sometimes in labor and delivery as well. A lot of people still, even though the guidelines changed in 2019, they still don't realize that the guideline has changed. And you still encounter people that say oh, no, we're not allowed to cover. You shouldn't cover. And so getting the word out to say that, yes, you absolutely should be covering, and not just for delays. So more and more hospitals, as time goes on, that are made aware of the guideline change, are really starting to cover, and also understanding the evidence and the reasoning behind covering. Because also, when we initially first thought about if we should cover a sterile field, our brains automatically went to, oh, well, just delays. But it's more than that. We should be covering our sterile field in a lot of other areas as well. And so hospitals are starting to get this information and understand it and, put it to use.
So let's break that down because you're teeing it up. What are those other reasons why we should be covering our sterile field? Because yeah, your brain goes to it's delayed. My room's going to sit open for a while. Let me protect my table because of the delay. Well, there's more to it. So go into those details and tell us why else we should be covering our back table.
Yeah. So I kind of think back to when I was a scrub tech and I did a lot of major spine deformity corrections, big giant spine procedures. And I would have my regular back table. I'd have my implant table. We would set that up. We would bring the patient in, then put in a central line, put in neuromonitoring leads, position the patient, get the C-arm in. So all of that it takes a lot of time. So there's an in-room delay between when the patient is brought in and when we actually start the procedure. So that's one of those times that you would think about like, oh, maybe I should be covering my sterile field because there's a lot of time between when it was set up and when I'm going to use it. But also putting in that central line, bringing in the C-arm, bringing in, a blood fridge and people coming in and out, walking around your field. So that's a lot of increased activity. So that's another reason why we should think about covering our sterile field. So increased activity, in-room delays, but also if you have a double setup. So sometimes we do cases where we're operating on one site and then we're going to operate on another and you're going to have two different back tables. If one back table is not going to be used right away, that's another time. And also clean closure. So this allows you to, I know when I was scrubbing, it was always so difficult to separate my, contaminated instruments from bowel procedures, from my closure instruments. It was dodgy. And so now you can set up like a Mayo stand or a small back table with just your clean closure instruments all at the same time, save you time, and then cover that field until you're ready to use it.
All right. So if say we've got that Mayo stand set up for our closure and it's already set up and ready to go, but maybe as the scrub nurse, I'm being relieved and I want, the person coming in, are they going to be able to see what's underneath that drape? Because I know with 3/4 sheets, you can't see what's under there. You just have to hope and pray that whatever they tell you is under there is there. So in this instance, is it where I can see it or is it still just hoping that, whatever they tell me they've done under that drape?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been in that situation too, where you go in to relieve and they're like, okay, cool, you're all set up. And then you find out you're not. The
Right.
Sterile-Z, the back table cover and the Mayo stand cover, they're clear. So you can actually see, like, is it set up or is it just opened? You can see, do I have that retractor that the doctor likes? Do I have sutures already opened? It can really, really help with just the visualization and the flow of the OR.
Well, speaking of flow, one of the things that we talked about as we prepared for this interview was laminar airflow. And I realize this isn't in place everywhere, but we talked about how it could be a potential blind spot for the facilities that do have laminar airflow. So can you define this concept just for anybody that's not familiar with it and why it could be a potential blind spot and really something that Sterile-Z can address?
Yeah. So laminar airflow is basically a air curtain of ultrafiltered air that's generally over the incision site. And it's pushing HEPA filtered air over the incision to help reduce the amount of particles and push away particles away from the incision site, thus kind of reducing the chance of an SSI. Where this can be a blind spot is that as the airflow moves further away from the air source, it loses velocity. And so it's pushing these particles slower and slower and slower towards the outskirts of the room where they can eventually start settling on surfaces. And our back table is in the outskirts of the room. So it's pushing these particles away from the incision site, but it's slowly pushing the particles towards your back table where they eventually settle. So laminar airflow is great for when you're actually operating, but if you have a delay or if you have a double setup or whatnot, it's pushing these particles directly towards your sterile setup.
So one of the things, as you talked about with the delays, one of the things that I really liked about this was how the product was developed. And I thought maybe you could talk about that story, because specifically around the fact that it's really the people that are using Sterile-Z that ultimately decided how this product should be developed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this was basically designed by clinicians for clinicians. A spine surgeon and his physician assistant worked to create the Sterile-Z family of products. And we have a couple different products in the Sterile-Z family. But it's, like we said, it's a clear drape, but it's designed with this patented Z fold so that when you separate the drape, this fold opens up and then it just has sterile edges going over your field. So that is what reduces, any chance of contamination on your field when you're taking this drape off, because it's specifically designed to open that Z fold and have sterile edges going over your field.
I like the peace of mind there. I mean, I keep going back to the 3/4 sheets, but that's what I had to deal with. And that was my life, whether it was over a Mayo or a back table. We even use 3/4 sheets with our big C-arm. So, I mean, that's just what we did. But I mean, having something that I know is sterile, that I know is not going to contaminate my back table, so I know that we can keep going. We're not going to hurt our patient. We're not going to have a delay. And the confidence there that those edges are sterile when you're taking it off, I guess it all goes back to the consistency, and it's always the same, because we do, when we're doing the 3/4 sheet cover, it's kind of however you come up with it and however you decide to do it. And if you don't do it right, you've contaminated something. So I like that, they're sterile, how it comes apart, and it makes it easy for use. I don't know. I guess I could talk about that all day, but I think that's a great idea and solution from people who actually have done it and who worked in the area and they know what the problem is.
I completely agree. That's what makes me so psyched on this product too.
What are some of the other methods? I mean, I know, Melanie, you just described the 3/4 sheet, but what are the other options? I mean, give me the lay of the land on what people who don't have Sterile-Z might even be doing that this would be an improvement for.
There's really no other options besides using a 3/4 sheet. You can use 1 3/4 sheet. You can use 2 3/4 sheets and do the double cuff method, or you just don't cover. There's really no other option besides the Sterile-Z. 3/4 sheets, like we talked about, you can't see through them, which is kind of a pitfall. But what always made me feel a little, I don't know about this with 3/4 sheets is they're so light that they have a tendency to slip around and move. And I've had my field covered with a 3/4 sheet, gone to get some sutures, come back in the room, and it's like halfway slipped off. So part of the 3/4 sheet that was down below the sterile field is now up on my sterile field, completely defeating the purpose of using this drape.
Right.
And then I'm sure you've encountered the situation with 3/4 sheets of who puts it on and who takes it off, So those are your options: Sterile-Z or, the 3/4 sheet, or just don't cover.
So there's like a whole family here, right? Can you talk about how versatile this solution is?
Yeah. So what's great about the Sterile-Z family of products is that we have multiple products for multiple things. We have the regular size back table cover for your just normal back tables. We have the extra large back table cover, and this will cover double deckers. It'll cover, those really big, long 6-foot back tables that have 3-4 instrument pan levels stacked up. We have a Mayo stand cover as well. And then we also have the Sterile-Z patient drape. So if you're doing 3D navigated spine procedures, I call it the patient burrito, and it uses the same Z-fold technology, but it's for the patient to wrap around the patient. It secures underneath and keeps all of your lines, leads, cords, all of that secured. So when you bring in the 3D imaging equipment, you're not going to hook on to the Foley or, any of the lines and leads underneath. And again, it has that great Z-fold technology. So one sterile person puts it on, 2 non-sterile people take it off.
All right, Laurel, as an ortho person, ortho is very much my jam, and it's where I've spent most of my time in the OR. And so, I mean, I can understand and picture even in a conversation how we could cover just a regular standard back table. That makes perfect sense to me. Can you help me understand more about how a double decker back table can be covered as well? That I have trouble maybe picturing that in my head, but I'm very intrigued because I use lots of double-decker back tables.
Yeah, I did not like double deckers. They did not work for me. But the extra large Sterile-Z back table cover, it is designed to be, like we said, extra large. Like it's really, really big. So when you get that drape, you put it on the top level of the double decker, and then you open it just like you would the regular back table cover. So you unfold it to the right, you unfold it to the left, unfold it back up over the top of the double decker and then down below. And then that Z fold extends over the entire double decker table, and it will unfold and open.
And pull away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's really cool. So it's just like opening your standard double decker back table drape, but it's on top of. Okay, I see that.
Yeah, these drapes open very, very similar to your normal blue back table drapes, but they're just used a little bit differently.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
I love that from a training perspective. One of the big concerns that a lot of people have when they bring in a new product, especially one that's not currently in use, when we talked about, hey, what are people doing? Well, many of them are doing nothing, is if it's already a process that they're familiar with, that just makes it so easy to integrate, into application and make a process improvement like this. You just gave us, from Melanie's perspective, a really great application, but can you give us an overview of all the different uses for the Sterile-Z technology?
Yeah, the Sterile-Z, I think people think about covering their sterile field for a delay, but it's not just for delays. So we should be looking at increased activity, multiple people in the room walking around. If your field is open and not going to be used, definitely cover at that point. Double setups where one table might not be used until later on in the procedure. Implant tables, if you have a separate table for your implants. And also clean closure is really important. You can set up a separate Mayo standard table for your clean closure instruments and then cover it so that they're ready when you're ready.
All right. Well, I'm going to run this down, and it's the top reasons why customers use Sterile-Z. I've got a top 3 and then I have an other category, but you talked about this as we went through the interview, but obviously procedural delays. That comes in at number 1. It's one of the greatest applications, but it's not the only reason. And then we come into number 2, which is contamination and infection risk. And then finally, number 3, AORN guidelines, which we talked about earlier. Obviously, this is a big motivator, is, to be up and up on best practice in the industry. But some other reasons why customers use Sterile-Z was also ease of use and increased efficiency and staff request. I love that one. Staff request. So they heard about the product and they said, this is something that is going to improve patient safety from an infection standpoint. It's going to standardize our process and make things a lot more efficient for us. And then finally, number 4 coming in that other category was eliminates the need to monitor the back table, which also brings some flexibility to the table. We've got some bonus content for this episode. So anybody that downloads the smartphone app for iPhone or Android, they're going to be able to see your study, which is a summary of data that supports the effectiveness of Sterile-Z back table covers. I don't know if there's anything you want to chime in, regarding that study, Laurel.
So this is our white paper that looks at the Sterile-Z back table cover and airborne contamination, and it validates that our Sterile-Z back table cover will protect your sterile field from contamination for up to 8 hours.
Yeah, and we live in an evidence-based world, and so having that justification whenever you're bringing a new product to the table is really critical. And I think partners like yourself who prepare that information and that data are going to really help people that want to make an improvement, into their day-to-day operations. And so I do want to point everybody to your website, tidiproducts.com. That's TIDIProducts.com, TIDI Products. There's also a Sterile-Z brand page, which we'll have a link to that in the write-up. You can find TIDI Products on LinkedIn and Facebook. And as I mentioned, that bonus content available on the First Case smartphone app for iPhone and Android. And not only will we have the study, but we'll also have the instructions for use in a combined document. So once you download that smartphone app and you open up the episode here with TIDI Products and the Sterile-Z technology, you'll be able to click on the gift box to be able to take a look at that PDF. Laurel, you did a phenomenal job on this interview, and I can't tell you how much we appreciated you coming on. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so you touched on some of the reasons why people in the operating room are using the Sterile-Z back table cover. And you touched on the eliminating the need to monitor the sterile field. And that kind of goes back to the AORN guidelines, because when they updated that to say that we should be covering our sterile field, they also showed that if you have a covered sterile field in your room, you no longer have to sit and babysit the sterile field. You can actually leave the room, just put up a sign notifying people that there's a covered sterile field in there, and limit traffic into the room. And so now if you have your covered sterile field, you actually can free up staff and you don't have to have a babysitter in there.
All right, Laurel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Laurel Stebbins, clinical specialist with TIDI Products. And Melanie, we talked about the Sterile-Z and really how it can do a number of different things. Probably, I'd say from this discussion, I hear standardization and really closing a potential infection risk, closing that gap where a lot of people aren't doing anything today.
Yeah, I really probably could have sat and had a conversation with her about this pretty much all day, because our conversation hit on a lot of pain points in my own experience in the OR. But really, like you said, standardization, relieving that question of, can I do this? How do I do it? And am I doing it right? Well, suddenly everybody's doing it the same way. And we have a product designed to cover our back table. And we know that it's keeping our instruments sterile, and we're not contaminating, which is also protecting our patients. I just think it solves a lot of those problems. And just in my own experience, if I had a product like this to use, I think it would have cut down on some time, cut down on some delays, and also just made things more efficient for us when we were in the operating room.
And Melanie, I'm assuming you've had to monitor the back table quite a bit in your various roles.
Oh, yeah. I have monitored so many back tables, and we just sit in the room. And I mean, maybe I can log into the computer and do a little bit of paperwork, maybe, but as a general rule, I'm playing on my phone, or I'm, just sitting there spinning in the chair, staring at the ceiling, waiting, for us to be told it's okay. The case can roll back, or we can do whatever. But yeah, I've monitored quite a few back tables, and it really is just sitting.
A lot of unproductive time.
Very unproductive.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this Vendor Spotlight. As a reminder, you can help support First Case by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or simply search for First Case on your favorite podcast application. Most importantly, and especially for this episode, you should download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android, because we do have bonus content for select episodes, and especially for this Vendor Spotlight. While you're there downloading the app, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review, because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you for listening to this week's Vendor Spotlight on First Case.